June 6, 1944, 6:30 a.m., the English Channel. The landing craft pitched violently in the dark, churning waters. Inside, 32 men from Company A, 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, pressed shoulder to shoulder, drenched by freezing spray, their faces green from seasickness and fear. Most had never seen combat. In less than an hour, half of them would be dead. Private First Class Harold Baumgarten, a 19-year-old from the Bronx, clutched his M1 Garand with white knuckles as the Higgins boat plowed through 6-foot swells toward a beach he couldn't yet see. Around him, men vomited, prayed, or stared into nothing, processing the impossible reality that they were about to assault the most heavily fortified coastline in history. What happened on Omaha Beach that morning would become the closest thing to a military disaster that still somehow transformed into victory. This is the story of the men who waded through that hell, the decisions made in seconds that saved thousands of lives, and the acts of courage so profound they redefined what human beings are capable of under fire. But before we begin this journey into one of history's bloodiest mornings, tell us where you're watching from. Whether you're a history enthusiast, a veteran, or simply someone who believes these stories must never be forgotten, we want to connect with viewers worldwide who understand that freedom was bought with blood on beaches like Omaha. The plan for Omaha Beach was based on assumptions that would prove catastrophically wrong. Intelligence had estimated one understrength German regiment defending the sector. In reality, the veteran 302nd Infantry Division had moved into position just weeks before the invasion, tripling the defensive strength. The pre-invasion bombing, which was supposed to crater the beach defenses, had missed entirely, dropping ordnance inland due to cloud cover and pilot caution about hitting the landing craft. Captain Taylor Fellers, commanding Company A, 116th Infantry, knew something was wrong before his boat even reached the beach. The naval bombardment was supposed to suppress the German positions. Instead, as dawn broke, he could see the beach obstacles clearly intact, and worse, tracer fire was already arcing out from the bluffs. At exactly 6:36 a.m., the ramp of Feller's landing craft dropped. What happened next was captured in after-action reports that make for grim reading. Company A had been assigned to land at Dog Green Sector, directly in front of the heavily fortified Vierville Draw. The Germans had pre-sighted every inch of that killing zone. Sergeant Raymond Hoback was the first man off Feller's boat. He made it 3 steps before German MG-42 machine guns, firing at 200 rounds per minute, cut him down. The men behind him walked directly into that stream of fire. Within seconds, every officer in the boat was dead or wounded. Within minutes, Company A had ceased to exist as a fighting unit. Private Baumgarten, in another landing craft hitting the beach moments later, witnessed scenes that would haunt him for the rest of his 94 years. His best friend, Private Robert Garcia, was hit in the face before reaching the water. Another soldier had both arms blown off by an artillery shell. Men weighted down with 60 pounds of equipment were drowning in water only 5 feet deep, too wounded or shocked to stand. The water was red with blood, Baumgarten recalled decades later. Bodies were floating everywhere. The noise was indescribable. Shells exploding, machine guns firing, men screaming. I saw a man's intestines hanging out, another with half his head gone, still walking. I thought, this is how the world ends. This is hell. The beach was becoming a graveyard. Of the 200 men in Company A who landed in the first wave, 96 were casualties within the first 10 minutes. The survivors huddled behind beach obstacles or the bodies of their friends, pinned down by fire so intense that movement meant death. What Allied commanders watching from ships offshore couldn't see was that the entire invasion was balanced on a knife's edge. If the men on Omaha Beach broke and retreated, if they stayed pinned on the beach until the tide came in and drowned them, if no one found a way off that killing ground, the invasion would fail. And with it, potentially, the entire war in Europe. By 7:30 a.m., Omaha Beach was a scene of absolute chaos. The carefully planned assault had disintegrated. Units were mixed together, officers were dead, radios were destroyed, and men were scattered across 6 miles of beach with no clear leadership or objective beyond simple survival. Colonel George Taylor, commanding the 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, landed in the second wave. What he saw froze him momentarily. The beach was carpeted with casualties. Wounded men were calling for medics who were themselves dead or wounded. Equipment was strewn everywhere, rifles, packs, helmets, body parts, and everywhere men were lying behind obstacles, paralyzed by fear and the sheer volume of fire. Taylor made a decision that would become famous in military history. He began walking up and down the beach, completely exposed to enemy fire, shouting at the men, "Two kinds of people are staying on this beach, the dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here." It was the kind of leadership that shouldn't work. By all logic, Taylor should have been killed instantly, but somehow his willingness to stand upright, to show contempt for the German fire, began to shame and inspire men into action. Brigadier General Norman Cota, Assistant Division Commander of the 29th Infantry Division, was doing the same thing several hundred yards away. The 55-year-old general had landed under heavy fire and immediately began organizing the scattered remnants of units. He found a group of Rangers huddled behind the seawall. "What unit are you?" Cota demanded. "5th Rangers, sir," came the reply. "Well, goddammit, if you're Rangers, get up and lead the way." The phrase would become the Ranger motto, "Rangers lead the way." But in that moment, it was a desperate attempt to break the paralysis that had gripped the beach. The problem was clear. The beach was a killing zone, but the bluffs above were the objective. Between them lay several hundred yards of open ground covered by interlocking fields of fire from concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, and mortar positions. Every exit from the beach was blocked by obstacles and covered by German guns. The plan had called for engineers to blow gaps in the obstacles and clear paths off the beach. Most of the engineers were dead, and their explosives were scattered or destroyed. Technical Sergeant Frank Perigori of Company K, 116th Infantry, saw what needed to be done. The Vierville Draw, the main exit from the beach, was blocked by a massive strongpoint containing a 75mm gun, multiple machine gun positions, and dozens of German infantry. As long as it held, nothing could move off the beach in that sector. Perigori, a 34-year-old from Charlottesville, Virginia, was a pre-war soldier, one of the few experienced men in his unit. Without orders, without support, he began moving toward the strongpoint. He killed several German soldiers with his rifle, then ran out of ammunition. He picked up a German weapon and continued. He reached the bunker entrance and threw in hand grenades. When Germans emerged, he killed them in hand-to-hand combat. Single-handedly, Perigori cleared the strongpoint, killing or capturing over 40 German soldiers. His actions opened the Vierville Draw, allowing men and equipment to begin moving off Dog Green sector. For this action, Perigori would receive the Medal of Honor, posthumously. He would be killed in action in France just 3 days after D-Day. By 9 a.m., the situation on Omaha Beach had reached its most critical point. The first waves were shattered. Follow-on waves were landing in the same killing zones and taking equally horrific casualties, and German defenders were reporting to their headquarters that the invasion was being repulsed. What changed the equation was a decision made by several U.S. Navy destroyer commanders that violated every rule in the book. The fire support plan had called for destroyers to remain at least 2,000 yards offshore, safely out of range of German artillery. But from that distance, they couldn't effectively engage the bunkers and strong points that were massacring the infantry. Lieutenant Commander Ralph Ramey, commanding the destroyer USS McCook, watched through binoculars as men died on the beach. The same scene was being witnessed by commanders of the destroyers USS Frankfurt, USS Doyle, USS Carmick, and others. These officers made independent decisions that would prove crucial. They brought their ships in close, dangerously close. The McCook came within 800 yards of shore, so close that Ramey could see individual German soldiers. The shallow draft destroyers risked running aground, hitting mines, or being hit by German shore batteries. They didn't care. Their job was to support the troops, and the troops were dying. The destroyers began engaging German positions with their 5-inch guns at point-blank range. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Concrete bunkers that had been impervious to small arms fire were blown apart by direct hits. Machine gun positions disappeared in explosions of dirt and steel. German defenders who had been calmly picking off American soldiers suddenly found themselves under naval bombardment at ranges where they could see the ship's gun flashes. Lieutenant Commander Harry Sanders, commanding the USS Carmick, brought his ship within 900 yards of shore and began systematically destroying German positions. His after-action report noted, "We were so close we could see the Germans running from position to position. We engaged every target the troops marked for us with smoke. We expended 1,127 rounds of 5-inch ammunition in support of the landings." This naval gunfire support, delivered at suicidal ranges by destroyer commanders willing to risk their ships, was the turning point at Omaha Beach. It didn't make the beach safe. Men were still dying in large numbers, but it began to suppress German fire enough that small groups could move. With German fire partially suppressed by the destroyers, small groups of men began finding ways off the beach. These weren't organized assaults by intact units following the plan. These were desperate, improvised efforts by mixed groups of soldiers who found themselves together and decided to move. Staff Sergeant Philip Stretchick of Company E, 16th Infantry, organized a group of about 30 men from different units. They were pinned down at the base of the bluff between the Easy Red and Fox Green exits. Above them was a steep slope covered with grass and topped by German positions. It looked impossible to climb under fire. Stretchick began moving anyway. He crawled, dragging himself up the slope using clumps of grass. Behind him, other men followed. When German fire forced them down, they waited, then moved again. It took over an hour to climb less than 200 yards, but they made it. At the top, Stretchick and his group attacked the German positions from the flank, clearing several machine gun nests and opening a path for others to follow. Sergeant Stretchick's actions earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. More importantly, they demonstrated that the bluffs could be climbed, that the German positions could be flanked, that the situation wasn't hopeless. All along the beach, similar scenes were playing out. Small groups of men, often led by junior NCOs or junior officers, were finding gaps in the German defenses. They were using initiative, courage, and desperation to do what the elaborate D-Day plan had failed to accomplish. Private First Class Carlton Barrett of the 18th Infantry Regiment found himself alone on the beach after his entire squad was killed or wounded. He spotted a narrow ravine leading up the bluff that didn't seem to be covered by German fire. He began climbing, realized others were following him, and kept going. At the top, he found a German machine gun position and attacked it alone, killing the crew. His improvised route up the bluff became one of the main paths off Easy Red sector. These individual acts of courage were multiplied hundreds of times across Omaha Beach. What emerged was not the planned, coordinated assault by intact units, but a spontaneous, organic movement of small groups finding weaknesses and exploiting them. The German defenders, who had been reporting victory, began to realize something was wrong. The Americans weren't retreating. Despite horrific casualties, despite the failure of their plan, despite every reason to give up, they were still coming. Small groups were appearing at the top of the bluffs in places that were supposedly secure. The impenetrable defense was being penetrated not by overwhelming force, but by relentless determination. Among the heroes of Omaha Beach, the medics deserve special recognition. These men, most of them conscientious objectors who refused to carry weapons, walked into the same fire as the infantry, but with the added burden of trying to save the wounded. Private First Class Edward Morozewicz of the 16th Infantry Regiment's Medical Detachment landed in the first wave. His landing craft took a direct hit from artillery, killing or wounding most of the men aboard. Morozewicz, wounded in both legs, dragged himself onto the beach, and immediately began treating casualties. For the next 8 hours, Morozevich moved across the beach under constant fire, treating wounded men. He was hit twice more but refused evacuation. Witnesses reported seeing him calmly bandaging wounds while machine gun bullets kicked up sand around him, giving plasma transfusions while mortar shells exploded nearby, dragging wounded men to cover while under direct observation by German gunners. "I can't leave them," was all he would say when officers ordered him to seek treatment for his own wounds. When Morozevich finally collapsed from blood loss late in the afternoon, he had treated over 200 wounded men. He survived his wounds and received the Medal of Honor from President Truman the following year. Private First Class Charles Shea of the 16th Infantry's Medical Detachment performed similar heroics. Landing under heavy fire, Shea moved among the casualties on the beach, completely exposed, treating wounds with methodical calmness that seemed impossible given the circumstances. A soldier who was treated by Shea later recalled, "I'd been hit in the chest and was drowning in my own blood. I was certain I was dying. Then this medic appeared, calm as if we were in a hospital back home. He rolled me on my side, cleared my airway, gave me a shot of morphine, and bandaged my wound, all while bullets were hitting all around us. He told me I'd be fine, that I just needed to stay calm." Then he moved to the next guy. "I watched him treat maybe 10 men in the next 20 minutes. He never hurried, never panicked. He just did his job like the Germans weren't even shooting at him." Shea would also receive the Medal of Honor for his actions on D-Day. The medics' courage had a profound psychological effect beyond the lives they saved. Seeing these unarmed men moving calmly under fire, doing their duty despite having every excuse to seek cover, shamed other soldiers into action. If medics could stand up under fire, how could armed infantry stay down? While the main assault on Omaha Beach was struggling, a separate drama was unfolding 3 miles to the west. Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder's 2nd Ranger Battalion had been assigned what many considered a suicide mission: scale the 100-foot cliffs of Pointe du Hoc and destroy a battery of 6 150mm guns that could rake both Omaha and Utah beaches. The Rangers landed at 7:10 a.m., 40 minutes late due to navigation errors. This delay meant the Germans were fully alert and waiting. As the Rangers' landing craft approached the base of the cliffs, German soldiers appeared at the top and began dropping grenades and firing down at the boats. The Rangers fired rocket-propelled grappling hooks with ropes and rope ladders attached. Many of the ropes, soaked by seawater, fell short. German soldiers cut ropes that did reach the top, but some held, and the Rangers began climbing. Ranger Private Harry Fate later described the climb. "You're going up this rope with 100 pounds of gear, Germans shooting down at you, grenades exploding around you, trying not to look down because you know if you fall it's over. Your arms are burning, your hands are torn up, but you just keep climbing because the guys below you are depending on you to get up there and silence those guns." Incredibly, Rangers began reaching the top. Sergeant Leonard Lomel was among the first over. He and his men immediately began attacking German positions. Within 15 minutes, the Rangers had secured a small perimeter at the top of the cliff. Then came a shocking discovery. The guns weren't there. The massive casemates the intelligence photos had shown were empty. The Germans had moved the guns inland to protect them from naval bombardment. Rudder faced a decision. His mission was to destroy the guns. Should he consolidate his position and wait for relief, or should he push inland to find them? He chose to push inland. Sergeants Lomel and Jack Kuhn, along with a small group of Rangers, moved through hedgerows and farm fields, searching for the missing artillery. They found the 6 155mm guns about a mile inland, camouflaged, and positioned to fire on Utah Beach. The guns were guarded, but the Germans had left thermite grenades, incendiary devices, stacked nearby, apparently for use in destroying the guns if they had to be abandoned. Lomel and Kuhn used the Germans' own grenades to destroy the breech mechanisms of all 6 guns, rendering them useless. They accomplished the primary mission of Pointe du Hoc without firing a shot, using enemy equipment. But the Rangers' ordeal was just beginning. Cut off at the top of the cliffs, they were subjected to continuous German counterattacks for the next 2 days. Of the 225 Rangers who landed at Pointe du Hoc, only 90 were still able to fight when relief finally arrived on June 8th. The mission demonstrated that elite troops with specialized training could accomplish seemingly impossible objectives. It also demonstrated the horrific cost of such operations. The Rangers at Pointe du Hoc suffered a 60% casualty rate, higher than almost any other unit on D-Day. By early afternoon on June 6th, the situation on Omaha Beach had stabilized. Men and equipment were flowing off the beach in increasing numbers. The German defensive positions on the bluffs were being systematically reduced. The beachhead was secure, though narrow and fragile, but the price had been staggering. Exact casualty figures for Omaha Beach remain debated, but approximately 2,400 American soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing by the end of D-Day. Some units suffered over 90% casualties. Company A, 116th Infantry, the unit that landed at Dog Green, had only 18 men answer roll call that evening out of 200 who had climbed into landing craft that morning. Private Harold Baumgarten, wounded multiple times during the day, survived and spent the evening of June 6th walking among the dead, looking for friends. He found what remained of his best friend, Robert Garcia, and several other men from his neighborhood in the Bronx. The boy, who had left New York eager to fight, had aged decades in a single day. "I couldn't cry," Baumgarten recalled. "I was beyond crying. I just felt empty. We'd won, they told us. We'd secured the beach. But looking at the bodies, hundreds of them, thousands of them, I couldn't understand how this was victory. Everyone I knew was dead or wounded. How was this winning?" The German defenders had also paid a heavy price. The 352nd Infantry Division, which had put up such fierce resistance, had been shattered. Many positions had fought until overrun, with defenders killed at their weapons. German casualties at Omaha were estimated at 1,200 killed, wounded, or captured. Oberleutnant Bernhard Frerking, commanding a company of the 352nd, was captured late on June 6th. In interrogation, he was asked how the Americans had succeeded despite such heavy casualties. His response was telling. "We killed so many, they kept coming. We killed more. They kept coming. We ran out of ammunition. They were still coming. You can't stop that. You can't defeat that kind of determination." While the infantry received most of the attention, the naval personnel who delivered them to the beach deserve recognition for their own acts of courage. Ensign Joseph Vagi, commanding Coast Guard LCI L-92, made 11 trips to Omaha Beach on D-Day, delivering troops and evacuating wounded. On one approach, his landing craft was hit by artillery, killing several sailors and setting fires. Vagi beached the craft, evacuated his wounded, fought the fires, refloated the vessel, and returned for another load. The Higgins boat coxswains, many of them teenagers, made repeated trips into the beach under fire. Coxswain Bill Hartwell, 19 years old, made 7 trips to Omaha on D-Day. He watched men be killed stepping off his ramp, saw his boat riddled with bullets and shrapnel, but kept returning. "What else were we going to do?" Hartwell said decades later. "Those were American soldiers, our guys. We couldn't just leave them there, so we went back." The casualty evacuation ships offshore worked frantically throughout the day. The attack transport USS Samuel Chase, serving as a hospital ship, treated over 1,500 wounded men on D-Day. Medical personnel worked in blood-soaked compartments, performing emergency surgeries under blackout conditions, saving lives through skill and desperate improvisation. Lieutenant Junior Grade David Kerr, a Coast Guard medical officer aboard a landing craft, made multiple trips evacuating wounded from the beach. On one trip, his craft was so overloaded with casualties that it was barely afloat. German artillery bracketed the boat as it pulled away from shore. Kerr moved among the wounded men, many of them dying, providing what comfort he could while shells exploded around them. "I remember thinking we were all going to die," Kerr recalled. The boat was so low in the water, packed with wounded, moving so slowly. The Germans were still shooting at us, but we made it. Somehow, we made it. And those boys, those terribly wounded boys, they weren't crying or complaining. They were apologizing for bleeding on the deck, thanking us for getting them off the beach. Can you imagine? Apologizing while they're dying. The near disaster at Omaha Beach prompted immediate and extensive investigation by Allied command. What went wrong? How did a carefully planned operation come so close to complete failure? And what lessons could be learned? Several factors were identified. First, intelligence failure. The presence of the veteran 352nd Infantry Division had been missed entirely. This meant assault forces encountered twice the expected resistance. Second, the pre-invasion bombardment had been ineffective. Heavy bombers dropped their ordnance inland due to cloud cover. Naval bombardment, while impressive, had been too brief and too distant to destroy concrete fortifications. Third, specialized armor had been largely absent. The decision to launch DD duplex drive amphibious tanks too far offshore in rough seas resulted in 27 of 29 tanks sinking in one sector. The British at Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches used specialized armor, tanks with flails to clear mines, tanks with bridges to cross obstacles, that proved highly effective. Omaha lacked these funny tanks, contributing to the inability to clear obstacles and exits. Fourth, and most critically, rigid planning. The D-Day plan assumed everything would go according to schedule. When the first waves were devastated, there was no flexibility to adjust. Follow-on waves landed in the same killing zones instead of being redirected to less deadly sectors. But the investigations also identified what went right: individual initiative. The plan failed, but individual soldiers, sailors, and junior leaders made hundreds of instant decisions that collectively saved the landing. This validated a core American military principle: train initiative and trust subordinates to act independently when plans collapse. The destroyer commanders who violated their orders to stay offshore demonstrated this perfectly. They saw the situation, recognized the plan wasn't working, and took initiative that proved decisive. In more rigid military cultures, such independence might have been punished. In the U.S. military, it was recognized as having saved the invasion. The soldiers who survived Omaha Beach went on to fight across France, through the Battle of the Bulge, and into Germany. Many became casualties in later battles. Some, like Private Baumgarten, survived the entire war and returned home to build lives shaped by their experience. The 29th Infantry Division, which suffered such horrific casualties at Omaha, went on to distinguish itself throughout the European campaign. The 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, which also landed at Omaha, would end the war having fought in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany, more campaigns than almost any other American division. The men of Omaha Beach rarely spoke of their experiences. When they did, it was usually to fellow veterans who understood. For decades, D-Day was commemorated primarily as a military operation, a logistical triumph, the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The human cost, the individual stories of terror and courage, remained largely private. This began to change in the 1980s and 1990s as historians and filmmakers started focusing on the soldiers' experiences rather than just the strategic aspects. Books like Stephen Ambrose's D-Day and films like Saving Private Ryan brought the reality of Omaha Beach to public consciousness in ways that statistics and after-action reports never had. The veterans, by then elderly men, began speaking more openly. They attended reunions, visited schools, gave interviews. What emerged was a remarkable consistency in their message. They weren't heroes, just ordinary men doing their duty. The real heroes, they insisted, were the ones who didn't come home. Private Baumgarten, who lived to 94, gave numerous interviews in his later years. He always emphasized the same points. We weren't special. We were scared kids a long way from home trying not to let our friends down. The beach taught us what we were capable of when there was no choice but to move forward. But it also taught us the cost. Every man who survived Omaha carries the weight of the friends who didn't. We lived their unlived lives. That's the burden and the responsibility. The American Cemetery at Colleyville-sur-Mer overlooks Omaha Beach. Walking through its 172 acres, seeing the 9,188 white crosses and stars of David perfectly aligned, the scale of D-Day's cost becomes tangible. Many of the men buried there fell on June 6, 1944, on the beach visible from the cemetery. Others died in the days and weeks and months that followed, pushing inland through hedgerows, liberating France, crossing the Rhine, defeating Nazi Germany. Each marker represents not just a soldier, but a family that received a telegram, a mother who lost a son, a wife who became a widow, children who grew up without fathers. The true cost of Omaha Beach extends far beyond the 2,400 casualties of June 6th. The cemetery includes the names of 1,157 missing, soldiers whose bodies were never recovered or identified. Many of these men were lost on D-Day, their remains buried in the sand of Omaha Beach or washed away by tides. They have no grave but the sea and the beach where they fell. Visitors to the cemetery often comment on the silence. Despite thousands of tourists visiting annually, the place maintains a profound quiet. Standing at the edge of the bluff, looking down at Omaha Beach, trying to imagine what those men faced at dawn on June 6th, the silence feels appropriate. Some experiences are beyond words. As of 2024, fewer than 100 D-Day veterans remain alive, all in their late 90s or early 100s. The last voices of Omaha Beach are fading. These men have spent the past 80 years carrying memories that most of us cannot imagine. They've built families, careers, lives lived in the shadow of one terrible, crucial morning. They've attended memorial services for friends, visited graves in France, tried to explain to children and grandchildren what it was like to wade through water churned red with blood toward a beach that seemed designed to kill them. And almost to a man, they've insisted they weren't heroes. They were just doing their job. The heroes, they say, are the ones buried in France, the ones whose names are on the missing list, the ones who never came home. But history judges differently. The men who landed at Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, accomplished something extraordinary. They broke through Hitler's Atlantic Wall at its strongest point. They absorbed horrific casualties and kept fighting. They improvised when plans failed, showed initiative when leadership was lost, and demonstrated courage that defied every rational calculation of survival. They weren't superhuman. They were American farm boys and city kids, factory workers and college students, men who months or weeks before had been civilians. They didn't want to be heroes. They wanted to go home. But when asked to do the impossible, they did it. The landings at Omaha Beach succeeded not because of brilliant planning. The plan failed spectacularly. They succeeded because individual soldiers made 1,000 decisions to keep moving forward when every instinct screamed to seek cover. They succeeded because junior officers and NCOs took charge when their commanders fell. They succeeded because medics refused to abandon wounded men. They succeeded because destroyer commanders violated orders to save lives. They succeeded because Americans, when faced with impossible odds, have a habit of finding a way. Today, the bluffs above Omaha Beach are peaceful. The concrete bunkers remain, now silent monuments rather than weapons. The beach itself is beautiful, a stretch of sand where families vacation, where children play in the surf, unaware that 80 years ago, men died by the hundreds in those same waves. But the legacy of Omaha Beach extends far beyond Normandy. It established principles that guide American military operations to this day. First, the importance of realistic training. The near disaster at Omaha led to much more rigorous amphibious assault training, preparing soldiers for the reality of combat rather than idealized scenarios. Second, the value of individual initiative. Omaha proved that even the best plans can fail and that success often depends on junior leaders making critical decisions independently. Third, The necessity of flexibility. Rigid adherence to failed plans costs lives. Success requires the ability to adapt, improvise, and adjust to circumstances. Fourth, the recognition of combined arms operations. The destroyer commanders who violated their orders to provide close fire support demonstrated that different services working together, even outside the plan, can be decisive. Finally, the understanding that courage comes in many forms. The medics who refused to carry weapons but walked into fire to save lives showed that bravery isn't just about killing the enemy, it's about doing your duty regardless of personal risk. These lessons, paid for in blood on Omaha Beach, have influenced American military doctrine for 8 decades. Every Marine storming a beach, every soldier conducting an assault, every junior officer making split-second decisions carries the legacy of June 6, 1944. The great tragedy of Omaha Beach is that for every story we know, 100 others died with the men who lived them. The soldier who made it 5 steps off the landing craft before being cut down, we don't know his name, his story, his act of courage in even attempting that impossible beach. The medic who died trying to reach a wounded man. The coxswain who took a direct hit bringing his boat to shore. The sailor who drowned trying to save another. The soldier who threw himself on a grenade to save his friends. These uncounted acts of courage, multiplied thousands of times, are the true story of Omaha Beach. The generals planned the invasion. The soldiers won it, one terrifying step at a time. We end with the words of Colonel George Taylor, the man who walked Omaha Beach under fire, shouting at men to move. In his after-action report, submitted days after D-Day, he wrote, "The success at Omaha Beach belongs to the soldiers who made it happen. They did not die gloriously, charging enemy positions with shouts and battle cries. They died in water over their heads, shot before reaching the beach. They died behind obstacles, unable to move forward or back. They died doing nothing heroic, just trying to survive long enough to reach cover. But they kept trying. And enough of them made it that the beach was won. There is no glory in such fighting, only necessity. These men did what was necessary, paid the price that was demanded, and made possible everything that followed. Let no one forget that the liberation of Europe began with men drowning in the surf at Omaha, shot before they could fire a weapon, dying before they could even reach the fight they'd come so far to join. Let no one forget their courage, or their sacrifice, or that freedom was bought that morning at a price we can barely comprehend. 80 years later, we remember, not just the outcome, the successful landing, the breached Atlantic Wall, the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. We remember the men, the terrified teenagers and young men who walked into hell because their country asked them to, who kept moving forward when everything said to stop, who demonstrated that ordinary people, when circumstances demand it, are capable of extraordinary courage. If you found this story meaningful, if these soldiers' sacrifices matter to you, make sure you're subscribed. Their stories must never be forgotten. The price of freedom must never be taken for granted. And the courage shown on Omaha Beach that morning must inspire us to face our own challenges with even a fraction of the determination those men showed. The beach is quiet now, but the echoes of June 6, 1944, still resound. And as long as we remember, as long as we tell these stories, the men of Omaha Beach remain with us, not just names on marble crosses, but living reminders of what humans can endure, can sacrifice, can accomplish when everything depends on simply moving forward. Never forget Omaha Beach. Never forget the price. Never forget the men who paid it.